Emerald, thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone has come undone. But I'm so excited to introduce writer and director Emerald Fennell. I had a whole preamble, but I feel like everyone knows Emerald, so I'm just going to keep moving. Emerald, thank you so much for being here. You're at the end of such a behemoth press tour. I don't know how you're still standing, but here we are.
Honestly, well, but do you know what? It's so lovely because I feel look, this is a book club, so I can really talk about it. Like, I love this book so much, and I was just like, so the opportunity to talk about this book and this film with lots of people is kind of a joy, and I'm really lucky that all the people I work with are just lovely, and so we've had a really nice time. So I don't know where I am, but it's quite lovely.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. And I have to say, this was a real passion project for me because I love this book. And I have to tell you my first experience with Wuthering Heights, which was when I was 8 years old. My mother read me Anne Frank, which was a choice. And I started keeping a diary, which she then read, which was also a choice.
Your mum read your diary?
Yes, but she read that I wrote about watching Gone with the Wind. I said, I want to feel the way I felt when Rhett kisses Scarlet. And so she rented me from Blockbuster the VHSs of Rebecca and Wuthering Heights, which to her were the two most romantic movies. And now looking back, there's a Laurence Olivier thing, but there's also a ghost thing. They're both really ghost stories and gothic ghost stories in the best way. And I wonder how ghosts affected your approach to this, because you very definitively end when Cathy dies rather than having her haunt Heathcliff, but still there is that gothic experience to it.
Well, I think the thing that I was sort of very interested in with Wuthering Heights is the kind of like timeless nature of it. And I suppose the thing about a ghost story and the idea of the concept of a ghost, I guess, is that something doesn't die, something endures. And so really, if there is a ghost story here, it's the kind of ghosts of the children that they were, and the life that they didn't lead, perhaps. But I suppose the Gothic, for me, of course, there's this sort of supernatural quality, but also I would say the choices that your mother made, which I think were marvellous, even though you were 8, it's also about cruelty, and it's also about a kind of love that is sort of fatal and complicated and difficult. I mean, Mr. De Winter isn't exactly a straightforward gentleman, nor is Rhett.
No.
You know, so it's interesting that the Gothic romance is a very specific type of romance. It's one that's kind of has a slight sadomasochistic edge to it.
In the book, it's quite between the lines any sort of sexual power dynamic, but in the movie, it's very straightforward. And we really see a variety of different sexual dynamics at play and power dynamics. How did you approach that from the book, and how did you decide which characters you wanted to have really play into that?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because there is, obviously, the book is sort of somewhat more restrained. But, well, I sort of feel like I'm being disingenuous, which I'm not. The thing is the book is absolutely filthy. And it's really interesting because there's a sort of quote from Daphne du Maurier when she talks about Wuthering Heights, and she talks about it as being a kind of sexless book. But I have never experienced it that way. And so it's really, so and again, I think it's partly the magic box that is this novel that everyone who reads it experiences something slightly different. For me, the sexual power dynamics are extremely explicit. I think particularly when it comes to, for example, Heathcliff and Isabella, I was very careful to retain as much of Bronte's actual language in this. So things like, you know, the scene where Cathy pulls Isabella's hair and stops her and says, you know, I won't be called dog in a manger again. That, like, a great significant portion of that scene is just all from the book.
Right.
The moment that Nelly comes and finds Isabella and Heathcliff at Wuthering Heights after they're married, I mean, most of his speech is in the book too. You know, I've just slightly, you know, pushed the context.
Her in a collar.
Yes, but I think to kind of understand what this book would have felt like when it was made, I suppose. These are just, you know, it's just kind of slightly, I guess, sort of reframing it. But I think the reason that people were so shocked when the book came out were because I think it's extremely explicit. Still reading it, I can't believe, no brutality disgusts her. I must believe she has an innate admiration of it. What a thing to say nearly 200 years ago. It's still difficult to swallow now.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, a lot of us in the office have been rereading this book for our book club, and we've all been shocked by how differently we remember reading it as teenagers or college students. I mean, I remember it as a romance, and now I read it, and it's so violent and emotionally violent and physically violent, and it's so difficult. And I wonder, I know, read it when you were 14 for the first time. What did 14-year-old Emerald make of the book?
Well, 14-year-old Emerald is sort of similar to 40-year-old Emerald, which is that she's, a little slut. So I thought it was terrific. Look, I thought I was and I've talked about it a lot before, and it just completely obliterated me. And I suppose I was at that age as well, where I was sort of on the cusp of things. But that's kind of what Wuthering Heights is about. It's about these kind of liminal spaces of like adulthood and childhood and innocence and experience and the kind of choices that we make. But I first read it as a school book. It was on the curriculum in England, which meant I approached it with a certain amount of like dread because, I wanted to be reading, I don't know, like Jackie Collins or whatever. And I was just so shocked by it. I was so shocked by what I believe to be quite a sort of sexual and explicit book. Perhaps that's because I was maybe like the characters in this movie, kind of in that skinless moment where I was so kind of receptive to the world that perhaps I did read more between the lines than I might have done later. But I just couldn't believe it was so transgressive and complicated and dark, and that these characters were so horrible. It was the first time I'd read a book with a truly unlovable female protagonist, and the male protagonist is also like unbearable. I mean, in the book he strangles a dog.
Oh yeah.
Like
no, he's
what my mum would call a bad egg.
Speaking of which, I have some questions.
Yes.
I want to know, having seen your other films, Promising Young Woman and Saltburn, the visual vocabulary that you're working with is so specific and has such a strong point of view. At what point in the process does that happen? I mean, to me, watching this film, it's like a Powell Pressburger film on acid. I mean, it really feels like it's such a big, bold swing. And I wonder, as you're writing the script, are you thinking that the floors are going to be that kind of lacquer red? Are you thinking about Cathy's hair being sort of fashioned into devil horns and the egg yolks? Or does that come after?
It's a sort of combination, but certainly the thing that I really wanted to do with this was try and recreate the feeling of a teenage girl reading this book for the first time. Because what I knew is that, having read it so many times since and, responded to all the kind of materials around it and other movies and all sorts of, I know that you can't make a straightforward adaptation of something so complicated and so personal and so brilliant. Like, she's a genius. So I thought, well, what I can do is make a film that it's approximation of a young girl's experience of a Gothic romance. So that really defined so much of the world for me. And so the first thing I did was I wrote down, once I realised I was going to adapt it, I wrote down everything I remembered. Having not read it for a few years, I wrote down everything I remembered.
Oh, interesting. And did you do a draft without reading it?
No. I just wrote down like a list of things I remembered. And a lot of them some were quotes, some were, scenes, and a lot of it was from the book. A lot of it was sort of the book, but slightly different. And then some of it was just downright wish fulfillment. Some of it was just like in my dreams stuff that happened. And so really I had to kind of contend with which parts to keep. And so, but I think the main thing for me is the book's visceral.
Yeah.
It's physical. You cry and you feel aroused and you feel disgusted. So I wanted to make the film physical, which meant, the skin, Cathy's kind of skin room and the egg yolks and the dough and all of that stuff, the kind of tactile stuff was in there from the beginning, because I do hope that movies can be physically moving as well as emotionally moving or intellectually moving.
And I think it's so interesting, the idea of this is the version of the film that I remember, and that has to do with why you put the quotation marks around the title. And I think that's quite freeing in some ways, because it does allow it to become your own version of it.
Well, I think it's freeing, but also it's honest. I couldn't, as somebody who loves Emily Bronte and loves this book, and I know, I think part of my love for her is knowing I'm not going to be the person who makes a definitive version of what she's done. Like, she's so good. In the same way you can't make a definitive version of a Shakespeare play. Like, they're so humane and timeless, and they're so tied up in, because they get inside you, they're very tied up in the personal. The audience is as important as the thing itself. So, like, I had to sort of say, I know that this is simply an attempt at, like Kate Bush's song is, I suppose, in a way, or like the figurines that Royal Dalton made are a response. That's what I like, is to try and take everything and sort of it, and then, bring it out in this kind of personal way.
Was there any part of the book that felt a bit like an albatross around the neck that you felt wedded to or restrained by?
Well, I think, honestly, the second book, which is after Cathy's, spoiler, it's after.
I just saw it.
No, but I know that for the podcast. And also I'm kind of conscious that very many people still haven't had the pleasure of reading the book, so I'm really...
That's true. Well, I saw this with about 10 colleagues earlier this week, and half of them had read it and half of them hadn't, and people were shocked that actually your film ends halfway through the book.
Yeah, it does. But the book itself, I believe, it's 2 books actually. And there's a lot of discussion about whether the second book was originally whether it had been written later for other reasons, and so, but whatever the case is, when I was kind of like looking at all of the stuff for this project, and I went and looked at Balthus's lithographs, which I talk about quite a lot because I just think he's a really interesting artist. He's very troubling and very difficult. Another person like that, and his use of space, and I don't know, his drawings are very, very interesting for this. And there's a great afterword where it's like, I tried for a year to illustrate the second half of this book, and I couldn't.
Wow.
And and that was really freeing, because I thought, like, well, yeah, because, of course you can, but I'm not sure you can do it in 2 hours. In the same way that I'm not sure you can cover, so much Hindley. There's so many aspects of this book that require their own adaptations, And so if you're going to kind of focus on this sort of specific love, kind of sadomasochistic love between Cathy and Heathcliff, then the second half of the book is difficult.
I have to say, rereading the book, the most interesting character to me is Nelly Dean, the servant who is the narrator. And you wonder, maybe the most unreliable narrator, and also maybe the person who's responsible for so much of this. And then I saw the movie, and I was bowled over, super bold, by how you really put Nelly at the center of it and gave her such agency and made her the villain in many ways, because it so becomes up to her to have caused all of this chaos.
That's so interesting that you felt she was the villain, because I feel, well, maybe it's because I'm an older sister, and I'm an older sister in my very core. I'm like, Nelly is the only sane person here.
Sure, but sane.
No, but I suppose what I mean by that is there's an amazing piece of scholarship from the 50s called Nelly Dean is the Real Villain of Wuthering Heights. And it goes on to say exactly what you're saying here, which is that all of the catastrophes that happen in this book happen because of information that is withheld by Nelly, or moments that are kind of like slightly, But the thing about Nelly Dean is I do disagree that she's a villain. I think is a really interesting character in the book, and hopefully in this film too, which is that she is actually who we would all be in this story.
Yes.
Saying, this is not a good idea. This is fatal.
Yes.
This will be fatal not just for you, but for everyone.
Yes.
She, you know, and everything that she does is kind of reactive. You know,
Yeah.
the decisions she makes to kind of deviate are because of an act of cruelty by Cathy.
Yes.
It's not as though she's a kind of malevolent force on her own. And also Cathy and Heathcliff but Cathy in particular is unbelievably capricious.
Oh, she's the worst.
You know, she's of course my favourite, but but would you let your craziest friend plot the course of your life?
Well, I have to say, I listened to an old podcast you did a couple years ago about what your ideal day would be.
Oh, God.
And you said that the afternoon you'd have a goss with a friend about something bad that another friend was doing. And I thought, this is Nelly and Cathy.
I think I know the podcast you mean, which is one of those ones where it's one of my best friends does that podcast, and I just absolutely just was much too honest, and now I really regret it. But I think it was low stakes gossip.
Yes,
It was
of
like
course, this is
nobody's
not...
done anything really terrible, but it's just a little bit
Your dream day
disappointing.
wasn't causing her death.
No. My dream day wasn't like ruining people's lives. It was more like, oh, we've been to a party and somebody's like slightly let themselves down, and we can talk. Or like somebody's ex-boyfriend has done something terrible, and so we can flog that dead horse for like 2 to 5 hours.
Gossip is an original power that women had. I mean, it really is such an early form of power wielding that was available to people. And I think Nelly is such a good example of that. And I loved the moment, and this is obviously not in the book, but when you meet Edgar and Isabella is describing, sort of annoyingly, the plot of Romeo and Juliet. And she said, it's all the fault of the nurse. She's causing chaos and everyone dies because of her. And I thought, well, then here we go. We're just getting the plot of the movie in one sentence, but of this story.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's the nurse. But I think the thing that always interests me and why I'm so kind of obsessed with this book still is it's so radically amoral. Mm-hmm. You know, and I just think that's so extraordinary, particularly for a woman, you know, and even now it's really radical to not say whether you think someone is good or bad.
Right.
Or to not say whether you think something is acceptable or not acceptable. It's radical to kind of withhold your own, I don't know, moral perspective, I guess. And so yeah, no, but I agree with you. Of course, the gossiping is kind of witchcraft, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of quiet power.
Speaking of the book being just so fraught and amoral, race plays a significant role in the book. I mean, Heathcliff is denigrated so often for his racial background. I wonder how you approached race when you were thinking about bringing this to the screen.
Well, I think the thing that was really interesting when I was kind of like researching the book and looking at everything was that there's a huge amount of discourse and scholarship about that precise thing. And what is really interesting and complicated when you're looking at adapting it is there's very little agreement, particularly because of the kind of historical context of the book and what was precisely meant, which does make it sort of a complicated thing to look at because people feel very strongly one way or another, whether, you know, because it's very inconsistent in the book and it very much depends on who's talking.
Again, unreliable narrators.
So that was always like a really complicated one, and obviously something I take like enormously seriously. And I think the thing that I felt was looking at all of the kind of historical scholarship about it, looking at reviews from the time, and also looking at the kind of art that had been made, the illustrations. Generally speaking, it was a sort of Southern European, and I use the word really in inverted commas because it is a slur, gypsy. Now, whether that is the correct interpretation, there is no, I mean, for me, it's really difficult to know.
Right.
Because, again, there is so little agreement. But what I did know was that I wanted to make a story about a very, very complicated sadomasochistic love affair. And that was the thing that I could do. And that the dynamics of the story, the political dynamics of the story, was something that certainly I was probably not best positioned to be the person to tell that story or that version of the story. But you know, it's always really complicated, these sorts of things, because you're always just trying to do the best that you can. And I also felt partly that in the book I kind of felt like I wanted this kind of feeling of like, I don't know, that there's something new coming into this world. The thing that's really interesting about Wuthering Heights is it's on the threshold of the Industrial Revolution, right? So you've got the new world coming in. And I felt like for this version, it would be really interesting to kind of use Edgar as a way of showing the positivity of that new world, you know, and of actually, but as I say, you just hope that everything exists in the context of this movie and that it makes sense in the context of this movie. But, you know, I that's all I can hope for, really.
I feel like the bathtub scene from Saltburn loomed large in our collective consciousness.
Okay.
I feel that
Yes.
people, it was a big moment. What is the bathtub scene of this Wuthering Heights?
So interesting. What's the bathtub scene? I mean, the thing is, I don't know that it's kind of like the dough. Do you know what I mean? Because the thing is, it's sort of, the reason I think the bathtub was so connective is that it's so, well, people doubt this, but it's so relatable. So, but I think for me, there's a moment here, again, you know, if people haven't haven't seen the film yet, there's a moment where Heathcliff catches Cathy doing something, and rather than shaming her, he enthusiastically kind of embraces it. And I think that's still something that's quite transgressive now. I think a lot of women have watched the film and been like, okay, you know, because there's still a lot of shame around female desire. So maybe that's the thing. But it's a romantic film, I think, more than it is. It's an emotionally engaging film more than an erotic film, and I think maybe the naughtiest bit is in the first 5 minutes of the film. Because I guess I maybe wondered what people would anticipate.
I think people should write in with their
Yeah, well, absolutely, because you just never know. That's what I've learned. You never know.
Me, the egg yolks was that.
Yeah.
I screamed.
Yeah, people, the egg, actually, I've got to say, sitting on a bunch of eggs is one of the most sensory, pleasurable experiences of your life, by the way.
Okay, but tell me when you're doing this.
What do you mean?
Like, when are you sitting on a bed full of eggs?
Because somebody has to do it, and I don't want my crew to have to sit on a bunch of eggs. So I'm like, I'll do it.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that it's like all filmmaking, is that the thing that you anticipated didn't really happen. So you expect lots of eggs to crunch, but what happens when you apply pressure to lots of eggs is they all go at once. So the sound is just like pop. So it's like, oh no, well that's not the sound, that's not the like satisfying crunch. So, but it is really weird because you sit on loads of eggs and they just don't do anything for ages and then they just go boom and it's fun. And look, if you can do it between some rubber sheets or something, like I don't think people should ruin their bedding, but it is like, recommend.
Wow.
Well, it's interesting, we've been talking about comps a lot, you know, because when you're making a movie, you have a lot of meetings and a lot of data and a lot of comps. I've never said the word comps so much in my life as I have in the last 6 months, and there aren't that many.
Yeah, what are the other ones?
Well, I actually won't name them because I feel like I wouldn't want to like...
Keep them to yourself.
So, but I think the thing is that the truth of it is people just don't really make films for women.
Yeah.
I think it's just sort of as simple as that, not just women, but like the kind of, you know, anyone who likes these kinds of movies. It's kind of fallen out of fashion, like the epic romance, even though it was the thing that was what kept cinemas going for the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And I think the thing that I hope to do really is, and it sort of comes back to what we were talking about, well, this Wuthering Heights being the kind of thing that I imagined, is like I try and make stuff that gives me a thrill, that makes me feel emotionally engaged, and a lot of that stuff comes from a like deep female place. And so, but it is interesting. There are very still, remarkably few sort of romantic films, especially with this kind of budget and scale.
What will be the next big Emerald film? Are we saying?
I mean, I don't know. I can do one thing at a time, and some people would say, no, I can't do anything at a time. I think that actually the truthful answer is I want to spend time with my family, because like you, I've got a young family, and I've made 3 films and had 2 children in 6 years. And actually, I just thought it's kind of good to be honest about like how exhausting that is, and how much it, and just how much it like takes from you. And so I think the next thing I'm going to do is like lie down, and I'm going to spend time with my children, and then, and then whatever the next thing will be. But I don't know yet. And I never really know. I'll probably know after this.
The last time you were on the podcast, you told Choma and I that you fought for Jacob Elordi's eyebrow piercing, Saltburn. What was an aesthetic decision you fought for in Wuthering Heights? The earring?
I mean, no, I didn't have to fight for the earring and the gold tooth. You kidding me? When he turned up in those, people just fell over. Even like the Grips, who were like men in their 70s, like, bloody hell. It's kind of like, come on. But I think, look, the beard. The beard and the long hair, which I thought was, I kind of always feel like we always have movies where women have a kind of makeover moment. So it's really.
We love a male makeover.
We love a makeover. We love a reveal, right? You're coming down the stairs in the red dress and she's all that. Or Mist is just parting in this film.
Wow. I want to know, did you film on the moors at all?
Yeah, of course.
How much time did you spend in Yorkshire? Because now we all want to go to the moors. We just did a travel story on where to stay in Yorkshire, because we're all now dying to go traipsing around.
So beautiful that actually partly the reason we built so much of this was because Yorkshire's actually too beautiful to film. That like actually it's sort of like the pictures you have of sunsets on your iPhone. You're like, it's never, like it's so epic. It's so kind of prehistoric Yorkshire. It's also very like, why I think it's so exciting is it's kind of not beautiful in a sort of sweet way. It's hard. But we were there for like 2 weeks and it was just the best. It was the best, but it was a nightmare because we had to shoot in studio first, which meant we, filled it with rain and fog and, all the things that Yorkshire has in February. And then we arrived in Yorkshire and everyone was like, well, we've never had weather like this. It was blazing sunshine for 2 weeks. And so it was that was tough, but it was amazing.
Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys is a book that I love, which is sort of an imagined origin story for Bertha from Jane Eyre. And I wonder if you could write your own separate story for a character in Wuthering Heights, who would that be and what would it be?
It would be Nelly.
Which you sort of did.
Yeah, but then after, because in this movie, Nelly and Isabella leave together. And I think Nelly is a kind of Becky Sharp character, actually. I think she would survive on her wits and her, and she's, and I think also I'd just do anything to work with Hong because she's just so
Becky
good.
Sharp, for those book clubbers who don't know, is the sort of calculating but brilliant heroine of Vanity Fair. Not the magazine.
No. Although that would be a great crossover.
And I'm very interested in sort of the mad woman tropes in Bronte novels. I've always been obsessed with Bertha from Jane Eyre, and Cathy goes mad. And even in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, she's thought to be mad when she leaves her marriage. Cassie from Promising Young Woman is kind of a mad woman. I wonder, are women always described this way when they make a decision people don't agree with? Or did you want to make Cathy seem madder or more relatable?
I think we're always accused of being mad or stupid or, promiscuous or whatever, I think any kind of, Cassie in Promising Woman is, she's called Cassandra because she's just telling the truth and everyone doesn't believe her.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the most relatable feeling in the world. And I think that in many ways, I think made Cathy a little less mad. Mm-hmm. I don't think Cathy is mad. She goes mad in the book because she's so distressed, because she made a choice that has ruined her life and that she felt was kind of damaging to her soul. But I think that, she's actually, what she is like radical,
Yeah.
Cathy's just like, she's all feeling and she's cruel and she's sadistic and she's vain and spoiled. She's like all of these things. I think we have this idea of her just like as wild on the moors. I don't think that's what Emily Bronte meant entirely. She meant like she's wild emotionally.
Yeah.
Because she'll destroy people's lives. She like blows through people. She's, Nelly says again and again that she likes to like provoke people and make them cry just so she can make friends again. Like that is a dangerous female character. That's a dangerous person. We all know people like that. So, I think that her madness was probably less interesting to me. In the same way that Isabella, I feel like I wanted Isabella to have a little bit more.
Isabella was so fun.
Yeah.
I mean, in the book, she's not fun. She's just sort of sad. But this, did you from the beginning know that she would be...
Well, I think, again, if I'm looking at it through my kind of 14-year-old lens, I always kind of felt a bit more like Isabella than I felt like Cathy. Like, I'd love to be the sort of glamorous, sort of local beauty, Cathy Earnshaw, but actually I was much more like an Isabella, like hoping to get a look in, hoping to get like seconds at the disco, And so there's something very relatable to me about Isabella. And also Isabella, what is sort of fascinating about her and wonderful is like time and time again, she is warned. The thing that she likes about Heathcliff is that he's dangerous and that she'll be able to escape what she thinks is she'll be able to escape this kind of life of sort of domestic boredom. Of course, she doesn't know what she's sort of hurtling herself into, but like, I think there's something very, I think her sort of journey here is one that I think a lot of people maybe will feel, which is that there are lots of us who want to stick our fingers in the socket and that there is some pleasure in that horror, even if it's, not good.
I know when she had to give up her ribbon room, it's one of the saddest moments.
I know, and when she sort of, I know. I mean, the ribbons, the letting go of the ribbons and the crafts.
I know.
So
we all want a ribbon room.
I know. I really would love a ribbon room. I remember reading years ago that Tori Spelling's mother, Candy Spelling. How is this?
Say it like a foreign language.
How is this something? No, but I'm just thinking of all the things to know, of all the things to remember. I remember that Candy Spelling had a wrapping room in her house.
That sounds right.
Is that true? And I was just like, whenever I heard that, I would have. That's the sort of demented world of Thrushcross that it needed to be. Like that these people were so rich and so bored that they would just like have a room for ribbons.
Last question. What was the most difficult thing to achieve in the demented world of Thrushcross Grange? Because there's the skin room, was there any detail that really took a lot of attention?
All of it. All of it. Like, I think that's the thing, is that working with Susie Davis, who's just like the most incredible production designer, it's just a constant, like, the things that I like are stuff like in Wuthering Heights, everything's covered in hair. So there are these kind of like sort of sheepskin, goatskin throws, or there's like skin stretched on the walls. And then at Thrushcross, the underside of everything is hair. So the underside of the staircases and the chairs are all hairy. And I just felt like that's the sort of like pleasure. And look, it's sort of, again, it's whether or not you kind of respond to that kind of like slightly, people either like their suspension of disbelief to be engaged with, I think, or not. And so I love, for me, it's like a daily process of where it's just far enough that I'm like interested in it, but not so far that it's like, bleh.
That's a perfect note to end on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Emerald, thank you so much for being here. I know you've done 2
No.
interviews today.
No, it's lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.